Well, hello there. Hi. Oh, God, I had steak 3 days in a row. I don't know how anybody's like eating steak all the time. After 3 days of eating steak, I feel like I'm going to die. I don't know how people do that. I don't. People are like, yeah, I had steak every day for 5 years. It's like, how are you doing it? How? Um, this is a little anemometer here. Measures temperature and wind speed. Very sensitive. Blowing 5 miles an hour, just blowing into it there. I like to say that I came up with this, but it was given to me in a special state, which is a place that's technically not a place. You could say it's like an anti-place, and of course I know that kind of sounds slightly strange, but in places like that, looking for answers to things, and 99 times out of 100, I always get it. I want to make things really, really easy. I was given a perfect analogy, and it's just so brilliant, so divinely simple, so beautiful in its simplicity. A lot of people have difficulty wrapping their mind around a lot of things. I'm going to actually take all field modalities and use a super simple analogy that even a young little person, in like, I don't know, second grade could understand. And human beings, I'm not trying to ever use big words. And I'm telling you right now, I want you to bear with me in this video, and I never say that because I'm going to make things really simple. And you're going to understand it clearly. I've often referred to light, and it's still correct, as a coaxial circuit, talk about transverse electrical magnetic, rarefactions and compressions. And to me that is divinely simple, but to 99% of people out there, it's not. And I do understand that. Nobody thinks in those terms, but I'm going to make all of nature divinely simple. And if we start out with the premise, and which is accurate, of Nikola Tesla's statement that light was nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. Okay? And he did say that. And also, too, I mentioned a few days ago, he called broadcast stations, i.e. radio, of course, ether whistles. And, of course, a whistle has a pitch, depends on what type of whistle it is, a train whistle or, a dog whistle, and everything has a frequency. And the frequency, I'm going to define everything, magnetism, dielectricity, and I'm going to use air, because air is a medium. Yeah. Nikola Tesla said light was a sound wave in the ether, but I'm going to unify everything. Nikola Tesla only mentioned light. I'm going to unify the rest of them with different perfect analogies of air. And it's going to be very simple. I'm going to define dielectricity, black holes, so-called magnetic attraction, electrostatics, scalar energy, a lot of different things, just using air. So, sound wave in the ether, of course, there's no such thing as a wave. A wave is what something does, not what something is. And of course, let's state the demonstrable fact that nothing emits sound. We all have in our head, of course, the ideation of speed of sound. That's the rate of induction. Rate of induction superficially might seem fancy, but it's just basically saying a speed limit. Every medium has a speed limit. It's the maximum rate of induction, or hysteresis, and hysteresis is a word most people don't use. And just say a speed limit. What's the maximum speed you could travel on the highway? Depends on where you're at, of course, right? Well, that which they call c, which everybody thinks and calls the speed of light, for example, it's not a constant. Of course, that changes depending on the medium, because light slows down, whether the rate of induction slows down in glass and water. And the same is true of sound, depending on air temperature and density, the so-called speed of sound, which is not a speed, but of course, once again, everybody's wrapped up in their head thinking speed is something's traveling from point A to point B. It's not. So nothing emits sound. When I actually speak, I'm generating a frequency, whether it be high or whether it be low, right? Frequency and wavelength. No different than, of course, light. And Nikola Tesla was 100% accurate. And Nikola Tesla understood that there had to be a medium. Of course, that medium is the ether. You can never explain gravity or 10 million other things, or light speeding back up after it leaves glass, by the notion that light's an emission, a particle, a wave-particle duality, so on and so forth. It's completely impossible. We're talking about disturbances of a medium here, and I'm getting to it very simply, very quickly here. Okay, if you just bear with me for a couple more minutes. So nothing emits sound and nothing emits light, and that confuses people, and they scoff and they roll their eyes at you when you say something like that. But maybe you think you're smarter than Nikola Tesla. It may be the case, but of course you're not. And I don't confuse intellect with wisdom. I mean, he thought about it deeply, and so did I. I mean, when I was super young, if someone said light wasn't a speed, a wave, a particle duality, there's no such thing as a speed of light, meaning it's an emission from something, I would have rolled my eyes too, but it is demonstrably so the case. You can't even explain light as a wave, particle, and emission, and so forth. So using Tesla's springboard for light being a sound wave in the ether, and sound, of course, is a disturbance of the air, I'm going to apply the medium of air, which is oxygen and nitrogen, a little bit of argon, to all the modalities. So if it's true for light, as it is true for sound, because we have a set frequency regarding sound, whether it's high or low, the same is true of light, but I'm going to apply it to everything else. Okay, I'm going to get to it very quickly here. I'm sorry for that little prequel rift into this, but EMR, of course, is like a voice. Frequency, of course, is the volume of the air that's actually occurring per a unit of time. The more air, the more frequency, the more power. I mean, if I have this, I know you can't see the dial, and it's a very sensitive little bearing right there, and go from 3 miles an hour, and if I increase the volume, I got it up to 8 miles per hour. So more air, more frequency, more power. Reconciliation of light and matter. So now we're going to take it further. When you've actually reached a propagation barrier, which is several multiplicatives above that of gamma radiation, you have a capacitance threshold. Now, if I actually put my hand behind this anemometer, you can see there's a little tiny fan in there. No matter how hard I blow, that little fan's not going to move. It has no way of moving. That's the speed barrier at which I've reached maximum capacitance of the medium. This is what people call C. When we say C, we of course mean the speed barrier, the speed limit of the disturbance of whether it be air, which is the speed of sound, or whether it's, and of course we have a sonic boom where you're actually breaking the sound barrier, and when you actually break the sound barrier you get this crack and you get this energy pulse. Yeah, when you actually break the sound barrier, well, you actually get a special type of crack where propagation no longer occurs. In the case of matter, the turbine of an atom, for example, and all matter is based off of hydrogen, the turbine itself, where this is actually on a fixed axle here, the turbine of hydrogen, of course, is three-dimensional. And the air of the atom is this magnetodielectric radius that's actually measured in picometers. So when you actually reach that barrier where no more capacitance, which reached a speed limit of no more frequency can occur, you've just reached this capacitance barrier. It's no different than no matter how hard I blow on this little turbine that's in here that shows me airspeed. If I put my hand behind it, analogous to having maximum capacitance, if I were actually able to stick an air compressor to this and blow it so fast, it will actually spin off its little fragile axis there and actually might seize and break. But in the case of that barrier called C, we have the generation of matter. Now, closed torus propagation. Now this explains light relative to sound, because all sound is a frequency. And of course, the more air, the more frequency, and the more power, and we reach this speed limit threshold where we actually generate matter. So now we've explained, and of course Tesla did as well, light relative to so-called speed of sound, with a set frequency. The highest frequency, of course, is that capacitance threshold where there is no more frequency. Then we have this three-dimensional turbine that is measured in picometers, and then we have, of course, fundamental matter. This is the reason why galactic jets on black holes, they also too call them astrophysical jets, are emitting out trillions and trillions and trillions. Go look up images of it. Just type in, do a Google search for galactic jets. They're also too called astrophysical jets, emitting out trillions of tons of hydrogen, which of course, by what we already know, since nature is a simple hippie chick, super high energy light. So now we're going to move on to another field modality, but we're still going to use, you know, the air, you know, the ideation of air. Yeah. What about scalar energy? Everybody wants to know about scalar energy. What would scalar energy be if we were talking about an air analogy? No frequency, no noise. Wouldn't, because of course scalar is measured in volts per second, so we're talking about rarefactions and compressions. So without generating a sound, rarefactions and compressions. Yeah. The blowing of air. No frequency, no sound, what we have in the airstream. And there are people that are actually really good at pursing their lips, and there's video of this on YouTube at various places. People are really, really good, and people train their breath to do this from either playing the flute or some other wind instrument where they've got really good trained lips and blowing air into musical devices. You could take a candle across the room and they'll actually create a compression front in the air. They don't make a single sound, and they'll actually blow a candle out from across the side of the room. Rarefaction and compression. No frequency, no wavelength, just longitudinal rarefaction and compression. So we have no frequency, we have no electrical magnetic. We're not talking about EMF. Tesla called this his death ray. It actually goes by many different names. It goes by, we currently call it DEW, but DEW refers to laser and scalar and a few other things. Tesla called it his death ray, but we're talking about scalar energy. Scalar energy has no transverse component. It doesn't partake of a speed limit because it has no transverse interaction of the medium as against itself. When you actually have a transverse component, which is what frequency is, i.e. wavelength, then you have that speed limit. The speed limit of sound, the speed limit of light, and the frequency is so high, you reach the threshold barrier, and then of course we have the generation of matter. Highest frequency, once again, as I said, becomes no frequency. Highest power is just, of course, this is the reason why super high energy, like gamma radiation, which is super high energy light, why is it so dangerous? Ask any PhD physicist to say, excuse me, sir, I know what gamma radiation is, but can you tell me why gamma radiation is so dangerous? Well, it's super high energy. It's extremely penetrating. Well, it acts like quasi-matter. The creation of fundamental matter is not that super far above gamma radiation, which is on the upper end of the scale of electromagnetic radiation. So why is gamma radiation, which is just light, super, super high frequency light, why is it so dangerous? It acts like quasi-matter. It is both super high energy light, but it breaks apart your DNA. It's incredibly dangerous. It acts like matter. Everybody knows, every scientist on Earth knows how penetrating gamma radiation is. It breaks apart your DNA. It's like, well, it's light. Yes, but it's super high energy light. Yeah, but that doesn't really explain it. Those are correct descriptions, but incorrect explanations. It acts like quasi-matter. We should actually call gamma radiation a barrier light, or capacitance threshold light, because it has the properties of both light of any frequency, including X-ray, visible light, radio, so on and so forth, and properties of matter. All light is a flickering torus. I mean, you can bring up 1,000 diagrams on YouTube or Google about light, and it'll actually show these vectored arrows were alternating back and forth, and they'll talk about photons, and all this stuff is incorrect. But this energy perturbation, which is the ether itself, before it becomes matter and it reaches that energy capacitance threshold where you actually generate hydrogen, we have this flickering torus. All light, if we're able to look at it three-dimensionally, and I know people can't really see it that way, is a flickering torus. All frequency is this curvilinear, and if you think about it, just think of frequency and wavelength, whether it be light or whether it be sound. It is curvilinear that always re-intersects with the axis at which the disturbance occurs. So until light becomes so high of an energy that you generate matter, then we have this flickering torus. It's literally the ether flickering in and out of existence of itself by itself in the form of a field, and of course the field's an ether perturbation modality. This is so divinely simple. So now we've defined air with light, frequency. I think I've made that very simple. Scalar, of course, has no sound, it has no frequency, it is mere rarefaction and compression. No different than, instead of the case of light, me doing this, high frequency, low frequency, transverse components, which of course frequency and wavelength is by definition, to scalar. No sound, just rarefactions and compressions. You didn't hear anything because there's no frequency there, but my little anemometer, it picks it up. It picks it up in the form of energy, doesn't it? Now if I actually stick a little copper windings around this, the harder I blow, the more power I generate. I mean, this is how wind farms work, except on an infinitely larger scale. The more the wind blows, the more the turbine blows, the more power generated, right? There's no frequency there. Now sometimes the wind is whistling through the trees and the turbine blades and so on and so forth, and we can see things moving, but there's no actual sound associated thereof. This is the longitudinal movement. Rarefactions and compressions, because all blowing air is a rarefaction and a compression. It could be long rarefaction, long compression, you know, talking about this instead of this. So now we've used air analogy to define dielectricity, scalar energy and light. What about in the case of gravity? I love it when people say, gravity doesn't exist. I say, well, just go get up on a ladder and jump off the ladder and tell me about that fun. I find it so extremely unintelligent when people say, gravity doesn't exist. It's like, I don't care what you call it. Let's just talk about that phenomena. Let's explain gravity with our air analogy. Explain gravity, electrostatic cling, black holes, so-called magnetic attraction, which is not magnetism at all. That's point source dielectric acceleration. All of these things, of course, are the erasure of space, but we have to use an air analogy. So we've explained scalar, we've explained light, and we've explained the creation of matter. So what kind of air analogy would we use to explain these multiple observed phenomena in nature? Gravity, electrostatic cling, black holes, so-called magnetic attraction. Very simply. Of course, I'm creating a sound right now. Sucking in air. You notice everything in the whole universe either leaves a hole or it goes back into a hole, and everything, including frequency and wavelength, is curvilinear. Because the conjugate geometry of the entire universe is the torus and the hyperboloid. This hourglass shape is a hyperboloid, by the way, and the negative image of this hourglass shape, i.e. hyperboloid, of course, is a torus. Isn't it interesting that geomagnetic precessional axis of the outer perimeter of the geometry of this hyperboloid is where we actually see the creation of trillions of tons of hydrogen on galactic jets and astrophysical jets around black holes? Now, to say black holes is rather idiotic. They're not holes at all. They're dielectric sinks. So, what would be the air analogy of gravity and black holes and electrostatic cling and so-called magnetic attraction? Because you can see that black hole underneath the supercell, of which I've got like thousands of videos thereof. Well, it would be this. Yeah. It's the erasure of space. Now, of course, I can't suck the air out of this room or the universe, but you're creating a vacuum. You're creating a vacuum of the medium. You're disappearing. Of course, it's going in my lungs, but don't take the analogy too far. What about a lightning? And now we're going to explain the dendritic formation of dielectricity and electrostatics. You've seen electrostatics. You ever pulled hot socks apart in a dark room after you pull them from a hot dryer? You see the little static. Of course, you see the same sort of dendritic discharge on Tesla, on Tesla towers, and lightning discharge. They're all dendritic. You know what sonoluminescence is? Sonoluminescence is the phenomenon that occurs when small gas bubbles are acoustically suspended and driven into a solution at ultrasonic frequencies. So you have this cavitation collapse of a vacuum because it's a discharge into counter space. Cavitation generates light. You can actually see it if you're behind a boat motor that's cavitating, and at high speed it'll actually generate ultrasonic. It'll generate light in the water, and it's not the plankton that are being stirred up. You see these little cavitation collapses of vacuum bubbles that are created in the liquid, and when those cavitations collapse, they generate light. Dendritic desaturation discharge, as Eric Dollard correctly said, and Heaviside I think said the same thing. Lightning is not a ground to cloud or cloud to ground, strike. I know you think it is, and it looks that way to everybody, but it's actually a discharge into counter space. It's a desaturation of the charge built up in the air or the medium. Sonoluminescence and lightning, where you actually have this dendritic creation of light, where it is a discharge into counter space. That discharge, energy dissipation, generates light. And we're not talking about light in this case, as we were in the first part of this video. Rather, that desaturation, which is what lightning is. Electrostatics are. Sonoluminescence. A lot of people wanted me to talk about sonoluminescence, but we have perfect analogies of air for describing, nearly perfectly in every case, all field modalities, because Tesla made the comparison to light being a sound wave in the ether. Well, a sound wave is regarding the medium of sound, of course, is the air. Of course, the medium of light is the ether, but we can have identical, comparisons of air and its modalities of disturbance relative to field modalities. Case of light and air, frequency, high frequency, low frequency, same in both the ether and the air. Scalar energy, the blowing of air, higher the volume, the higher the energy, because scalar is measured in volts per second rather than cycles per second. It doesn't have any transverse component. There is no cyclic frequency or wavelength regarding scalar. Gravity, sucking in air. Yeah. Sonoluminescence, dielectric, electrostatics, lightning. Higher the power, the higher the frequency. The more the air, the more the frequency, the more power generated. Interestingly enough, in the case of capacitance in the ether, the smaller the volume, the higher the capacitance. Because anything that's relational to volume is relational to force. But that's not energy or rest energy. That's the dissipation, loss of energy. That's what human beings really don't get. They can't rest their mind around rest energy. The speed of light and the speed of sound, neither of which are speeds, because nothing emits sound. When I'm talking at X frequency or Y frequency, I'm creating a disturbance in the medium. Nothing emits sound any more than anything emits light. Springboarding from Nikola Tesla's comparison of light being a sound wave in the ether, I could define every field modality using his air analogy, because sound is relative to air, of course, obviously so. No air, no sound. You, of course, generate sound. Doesn't have to be air. You can actually generate sound and matter. You can put your lips up against a piece of rock and generate sound. So it doesn't have to be air, but when we're talking about sound, we're of course generally talking about the air. You can create sound waves of XYZ frequency in rock or water or anything else. I mean, that's obviously undeniable. I can create identical analogies therein also. The sonar used by whales and dolphins. I wish they could get people to wrap their mind around the fact that all light is a flickering torus. These transverse force vectors that are curvilinear around a rest point. There is no such thing as a photon. A photon is a conceptual abstraction dreamt up by materialists, by atomists. The centripetal, of course, collapses into a rest node. If you want to know what rest energy looks like, imagine all this sand comes from this point right here where there is no vector, there is no XYZ coordinate, has no Cartesian value or footprint, and it's actually emitting from the center here, traveling curvilinearly around, that's a difficult word we none of us normally use, towards increasing inertia and acceleration. So centrifugal force divergence, toroidal, centripetal inertia and acceleration towards rest. People really can't wrap their mind around rest energy. But every field modality has an identical perfect analogy, or nearly perfect, in the case of the air. Blowing of the air is scalar, any sound frequency relative to light or EMF, electromagnetic frequency or electromagnetic radiation, you take your pick. Tomato, makes no difference. Gravity, the sucking in of air. A vacuum of air. The erasure of space. Because space has no properties. Space is no different than a shadow. Shadow is the absence of light, and space is the absence of inertia, an absence of energy. Space is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. Literally the volume of the torus. I wanted to make this simple and actually point some simplex analogies comparing air to all field modalities so that people could wrap their mind around it. When you say coaxial circuit and transverse electromagnetic and longitudinal rift, I mean, to me it's not complicated at all. To everybody else it kind of boggles their mind. At least that's what people report back. So I just wanted to make a simple analogy using air that everybody could wrap their brain around. I hope I succeeded in that, but tell me if I did fail. If so, I apologize. You ever want to contact me? A bunch of free articles are in the description below. If you ever want to contact me also too, my email is there. Lux Veritas, and have a lovely weekend.